Welcome to As I Live and Grieve, a podcast that tells the truth about how hard this is. We're glad you joined us today. We know how hard it is to lose someone you love and how well-intentioned friends and family try so hard to comfort us. We created this podcast to provide you with comfort, knowledge, and support. We are grief advocates, not professionals, not licensed therapists. We are you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back again to another episode of As I Live and Grieve. So happy to have you keep listening. I can't tell you how much you actually do for me. I've healed a lot in my grief. And as I tell everyone, I'm going to grieve till the day I die. So I never expect to be healed from grief. I'm healing in my grief. And I think by now, those listeners that have been coming along week after week, you're probably finally accepting that for yourselves as well, and letting your life and grief kind of adapt to each other and take care of yourselves. That's what we need to do. Great guest today. You know, I say that every week, but it's always true. I have great guests. With me today is Duff Stoneson. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, stone like rock. So
Okay. Well, my maiden name was actually
Oh,
Stone,
cool.
without the option on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's so great to have you here, Duff. Thanks for taking the time to
Well,
join
thank
me
you for
today.
inviting me, Kathy. I'm really happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, I'm up in the very frigid north in upstate New York, over near Buffalo. Yay, Bills. And Duff is actually down in Texas, which I know has got to be a little bit warmer at least. But it's so nice to connect with you. Before we really get started, though, would you just share with our listeners a little bit of your background, please?
Sure, yeah. So professionally, I am a psychotherapist. I do wide range of work, trauma work. It's hard to mention all of the interests that I have in that field, but so I work as a psychotherapist, and we also met through the context of my other project as a sound worker. Some people would call it sound healing. I don't love that term personally, but so that's another thing that we do, that I do, that I've been a musician my entire life in a number of different formats, and music and sound have always been really powerful for me in terms of healing modalities. And so it's one of those topics that I can't help but get on a soapbox about. Yeah.
Well, we're going to have to share a soapbox probably.
Hey, I'm all for soapboxing on this. It's needed.
Actually, our paths crossed as I was doing some research in the area of sound. When I experience something that all of a sudden makes me go, whoa. And that's what happened with sound, actually. I've said before that I was in a crystal shop, and before I went to check out, they had my crystals in a little bag, and they turned around, and there was a huge bowl on the counter behind them, and they took what looked like a mallet and rubbed it around the rim. And all of a sudden there was this, I don't know, call it a vibration, call it a pulsation. I don't know what it was, but it was within me. I didn't have goosebumps or anything, but I just felt it inside me. And that actually is what started my exploration, if you will, in sound. And I am not done yet, but Duff, you're a part of it. In chatting online, one of the things that concerns me, and it happened more with sound, I think, just because of what seems to be a trending popularity, if you will, in the area of sound baths, sound healing, sound immersion, call it whatever you want. I think the probably most known terms are sound bath or sound healing. And there's a distinction even between those two. But I want my listeners to know, whether it's sound or any other modality, even finding a therapist for yourself, you have to be cautious. You have to find someone who is going to work with you, who you are going to be able to connect with, communicate with, build trust with. But for a moment, for our first questions, let's talk about sound. Now, one of the things I learned from Rich, his episode has already launched, people have listened to it, is that if you're looking for someone to help you with sound, because like me, this is either a curiosity or you're convinced, you believe in your heart that there's something to this scientifically and you want to experience it, you decide you're going to look for someone. but the field is full of them. How do you know the person you're finding is a legitimate person? Let's start
Yeah.
there.
I just want to echo what you said. It is overwhelming, right? The field is, I think there's always been a lot going on in the field. It's, there's a lot of crossover with what people often colloquially call new age, the new age stuff, which,
Exactly.
I don't know. I try to step carefully around these kinds of things because I am a deep believer in the power of other ways of knowing, of knowing through
Hmm.
intuition, knowing through what people might call spirituality. Those, I don't ever want to lean into what, in a lot of the discourse that people like Rich and I have. Love Rich, by the way, he's great.
Yes.
Sometimes we talk about scientism, which is where we can lean too far into more of what's based on my therapeutic approach. It's like a left brain approach where it's all very rigid and
Hmm.
formulaic and like anything that we
Right.
can't objectively measure is just not real.
Right.
And I don't know, I feel like the entirety of human history kind of flows against that because human beings, we have always sought knowledge through other means. So it's such an important thing.
Hmm.
But I think that the danger can be when it's so easy to get caught up in your felt sense of knowing, like the description you gave of hearing that the singing bowl and how that resonated in your body. Like when you have an experience like that, it's so powerful, and
It
yeah, and
is.
we naturally want to know what the hell was that? Where do I get more of that?
Exactly. And that was well over a year
Yeah.
ago. And I can still sense it.
Yeah. I hear you. I've had experiences like that stick with me very much as well. And so I don't want to,
Mhm.
get off on my soapbox yet. But coming back to your question of how do you find someone who's legitimate or who's good, a lot of the perspective I have on sound is informed by my training as a therapist. And one of the big differences between those fields is that when you're a therapist, you're required to get a master's degree in, with a
Mhm.
specific set of curricula that you have to study and test. You have to
Right.
go through a licensure process. If you go off and do something that ethically you really shouldn't be doing, you have a license that you work very hard to achieve that can be taken away.
Right.
Like, and in the field of sound, there's nothing like that. It's like if you
Exactly.
want to be a sound healer, call yourself a sound healer and congratulations, you're a sound healer. You
That's
probably
right.
need to buy some instruments at
Buy
some
a
point,
bowl.
maybe, I don't
Yeah.
know. But and I don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, if people aren't licensed, then they're not legitimate. Because, like people often compare, say, life coaches to, professional licensed therapists. And I'm not going to deny for a
Hmm.
second that there are life coaches out there who do fantastic work with people, and then there are also therapists who are
Hmm.
probably doing bad work and running afoul of the ethical boundaries. They're just not getting caught. So, I'm a big, big believer in the nature of the therapeutic relationship as one of the most powerful vehicles for that healing, for that
Mm.
support, the support that one might
Right.
receive. And from a very simplistic perspective, you have to trust your judgment. But I think that begs the question of, well, how do we work ahead of time to cultivate good judgment about that? How do we know particularly when we're exploring a field that we're not familiar with, or, something like sound healing that we might not know anything about? How do we know if our judgment is reasonable, if we can trust our gut? So there are a lot of specifics that you've probably covered with some of your other guests in this area around like magic frequencies and things like that. No, you
Nope.
haven't covered that? Okay. Well,
Have
so I
not.
think in the sound healing field in particular, one reason that this discussion is so interesting is that there are a lot of very specific claims about what will do what. One of the things we talk about a lot is something we sometimes call frequencyism, which is one of the most common ideas you'll encounter as you're getting into sound healing, which is like the idea that 530 hertz or some specific frequency will do
Hmm.
some specific thing. Like anything
Right.
from this will cure your headache or help you study to this people, we were talking before the episode started about during COVID and like, oh man, there were so many
Hmm.
people saying, listen to my YouTube video of this, frankly, very irritating buzzing noise and it will protect you from COVID. And
Right.
yeah, and
Right.
that's where a lot of the discourse with us came up around saying, okay, we're all in agreement that sound and music are really powerful, but that's when it gets dangerous when you're, people are maybe not going to take other precautions because they think that,
Right.
having done this other thing somehow protects them. So, I could run through a list of some of the low hanging fruit. Personally, I would say that in my studies, my research, my just investment in this topic, I've never found anything legitimate to suggest that specific frequencies will do specific things. There's often a lot of kind of squishy gray area in terms of there's sort of a sleight of hand thing that happens in some of the, doing the air quotes here, the proof that people offer that they might reference real research, like, there's research that's been done into hypersonic sound being able to destroy cancer cells, I think. And then they'll say, and because of that, my yodeling will protect you from COVID. And it's like there's this kind of bait and switch thing where they're conflating a highly controlled lab environment with an extremely focused, multi-million-dollar piece of hypersonic sound equipment with their yodeling or their bowls or whatever, and those things don't convey, but it's enough that when these ideas are being presented primarily via meme format on social media, it feels convincing. You're like, yeah, sure, that makes sense to me. We all can fall prey to that. But so that's one example of people making claims that maybe can't be backed up,
Right. Yeah, and one of the reasons it sounds so convincing is because, and Facebook is famous for this, so is Google. It seems that if you want something, and maybe you went to Google and you did sound bath as a search, by the time you get back on Facebook, you're going to start getting ads for sound baths or sound healing or sound something. Is AI is taking over things like that. And a couple years ago when it happened, I thought, what the heck is going on here? Now I understand what is going on. And we hear the word analytics a lot as well. And that's what it is. So these things are often prompting us or coming to our attention when we need them, because somehow we've communicated that we need them. And often, especially in the instance of grief, we may not really be thinking entirely clearly. So we have to be very, very careful. Let me throw out a premise. If you want something to help you, and that's just very basic, and you start looking for it, I guess I would like to propose that if you think of the outcome you want, like if your outcome is specific enough to say, I want to be healed from this pain in my neck. I want the pain in my neck to be gone. That's a very specific, very focused outcome that you desire. I am going to propose that you need to do more than just preliminary research or investigation. Because you have such a specific desire, you need to dig and dig deep and find the best person, the person most qualified that will give you the best likelihood of that outcome. And it's not going to be the person that says this frequency is going to help you lose weight if what you want is to get rid of the pain in your neck. So just as a very simple statement to people, think about what you want. If you want to have those symptoms of grief go away forever, look for somebody that's got the best chance of helping you do that, whether or not you ever get there. But along the way, you do that. Does that sound like a fair statement, a fair premise?
It does. Yeah. I think where my mind goes when you're talking about this is the value of, well, even the complexity in that with grief, like you named, we don't have all of our capacity available to us because our emotional bandwidth is, of course, very tied up with what we're experiencing. And the danger there, I think, is that often the people who float to the top of the algorithm, so to speak, like what you were talking about with social media and the internet, is, well, I can only speak to American culture at large, because that's all I've ever lived in. But man, we love magic pills. We love the idea that a magic pill, whether it's an actual pill or a frequency on YouTube, is gonna take that pain away. And
have you found it yet?
I'm working on it. Yeah, it's back to the yodeling
Me
thing
too.
I was
I'm
talking
still
about.
looking. Yep.
And at the same time, though, I don't want to be too disparaging there because I have so much compassion for grief. That's another thing about our culture is that we're not necessarily really good at preparing people for grief. I mean, painting in broad strokes, like I do a lot of work with men in our masculinity, for example, and like we're told men
Hmm.
don't cry, men, it's gotten better with younger
Right.
generations, but like,
Yes.
we're often unprepared for handling something like grief that not only is, logistically incredibly complicated because of everything that goes into
Hmm.
that whole process,
Sure.
but emotionally, and then there's this visceral gut punch that comes with extremely strong emotions, and grief is one of those things, yeah,
Exactly.
it's maybe one of the strongest, even sometimes one of the first, just undeniably visceral experiences of emotion that we can have. And
Hmm.
so of
Yeah.
course, I'm someone who, like, yeah, I want to go out and do all the research and I want to read the papers. And sometimes that might be too much to ask of people when they're in that state. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think one
Exactly.
good bit, oh, sorry, go ahead. I
Yeah.
can just, well,
No,
the
no,
thing I might
no,
add,
go right
just to
ahead.
kind of touch back on what you were saying about finding the best person, because I think that can be, it's such good advice. One of the things I've learned is that the good people, the best people who are able to help you, they're often not the ones who are going to make the biggest claims. The people that really like are
That's right.
dedicated to their craft and really know what they're doing, they're often the most circumspect because they're
Hmm.
aware of the limitations of what they can do and what they can't. And, a really good therapist, for example, if you go to them needing help with some specific experience that you've had and they don't know a damn thing about it, they're going to tell you that and help you find someone that does know about that, as opposed to someone who might
Right.
say, oh,
Right.
yeah, that's, let me do my yodeling for you,
Yeah.
And no offense to yodeling, right? I know
Exactly.
yodeling is great. It's just the example that comes to mind for me.
No. Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, we are looking for a magic pill. But me personally, I'm getting tired of going to the
Sure.
pharmacy for medications. I want something that is going to make me feel something other than side
Hmm.
effects. I want something that's going to make me think, going to make me respond in some way. I don't like the pills anymore. I take very few of them, actually. I'm fortunate in that way. But that's why, actually, ever since I started doing the podcast and started considering some different modalities, I've tried some things that most people had never heard of. I've tried the energy alignment
Nice.
method because the sample, the experiment, if you will, that she gave me just kind of blew my
Nice.
mind. But I'm also the type of person that does a lot of
Yeah.
research, and that's why it's taken me over a year to find a select group of people to talk about
Yeah.
sound with, because I did my
Mhm.
research until I got people that I respect and that have extensive, and I mean extensive, backgrounds in education, educating themselves, learning, training, still training, retraining, and listening to all the new stuff. And they all get it. And that's who is going to go on my journey with me. I'm getting them lined up as we speak. And I'll continue to report back to the podcast. But back to the point we're trying to make today, and that's, you have to be careful. If you are not prone to research, if you just want to open the paper and have an ad jump in your face, then I'm going to say, please, please be very, very careful, because chances are you're going to spend money for something and get nothing from it, or get more problems than you started out with. So if you're not the type to do research, maybe find a friend, ask them to do some research for you. Maybe find a buddy to do it with you. I mean, you certainly could both attend, a sound session or something like that. Now, we talked about outcomes. If you don't know what you're looking for, but you just have a curiosity, would there be any harm in just attending a local event without any concern or regard for the background someone might have? If they just advertised 30-minute sound bath, is there any harm in going to something like that if you're just curious?
That's such a great question. I got to say, I really appreciate the direction you go with this. I would say for the most part, probably no. That's one of the saving graces of this. And it's also one of the reasons why people can make all kinds of random claims about why the thing works. Because often with sound and music, like, it works. but it's not
Mhm.
something like mathematics where in order for you to make it do the thing, like, if you were to do some complex mathematics, you have to know how the mathematics work in order to do it. That's not the
Mhm.
way it is with sound. You can be a musician who picks up an instrument and plays it, and people say, man, that made me feel great, which in and of itself is really powerful. It's just then that often
Sure.
many of us, our nature is to say, well, I need to understand why. And that's where there's so many ideas on offer out there that can really lead you down the path. I think that one of the side benefits of that that's so great is that if we help ourselves think about how to think about these sorts of things and kind of impose some
Mhm.
limitations on what we expect, where, kind of how far we're willing to follow these sorts of things, then we can really protect ourselves, whether or not we're seeing,
Mhm.
we might be working with a practitioner who wants to make all kinds of claims about this or that. I'm very much a believer that what sound tends to do is it helps us get into our bodies, which again, because we as a culture tend to be very kind of in a lot of the stuff that I study, we talk about being cut off from the neck down, like we're out of touch with our bodies,
Mhm.
and that's where so much of our
Right.
emotion originates from. Sound can be a great way to get in touch with that stuff and really unlock aspects of our grief that otherwise we would have a hard time accessing to work through. Because I do buy
Mhm.
into the idea that, we grieve through things as opposed to just kind of ignoring it and waiting to forget about it. That's often not
Yeah.
not very effective.
Yeah. Well, forgetting doesn't
Yeah.
help because decades ago, I gave birth to a little boy who initially they said was dead. Then they revived, got a heartbeat, but within 24 hours, he did die.
Mm.
And it was a loss that at the time, of course, there were no such things as bereavement groups, and going to therapists was such a stigma that was never a suggestion for me. But I never saw this baby, never held this baby, touched this baby, and no one ever took a picture.
Oh,
So the baby is only a very remote
mm.
memory. But it's not until recent years doing the podcast that it's all of a sudden hit me that I am now, decades later, grieving this baby that I never met. So the years don't
Yeah.
matter. They just don't matter. And you can't just forget about it.
Yeah.
I haven't forgotten. So you just can't forget about it. It's there in your mind
Yeah.
somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man,
Yeah.
what a powerful, huge. I don't have the words for that experience, Kathy, and I appreciate
Yeah.
sharing that. I know it's really personal, but man, that's a hard loss.
Well, it is, but I've tried to be very candid
Mm.
on the podcast because I know in my heart that there more than one. There are others out there that may have gone through a similar situation. And certainly with
Yeah.
COVID, a lot of people never got to say goodbye. They never got to say their
Yeah.
goodbyes. And I think it's important because these are some of the things that we're dealing with in our
Yeah.
grief. Back to the subject
Yeah.
at hand. No,
No,
go
no,
ahead. Oh, make your
I was
statement.
just gonna say that something else that I work with sometimes is, men
Hmm.
and our experiences of pregnancy loss because like
Mm.
so often,
Yes.
it's a thing that birth and death, two things that are so incredibly
Yeah.
powerful that we don't talk about it very much as a society. There's still
Right.
taboos
Right.
around that. And and for
Yeah.
men, often like if we're partnered with someone who's pregnant and there's a loss, like it's often it's hard to feel like there's even a place for us, but to be part of that
Sure.
conversation out of respect, but at the same time, we feel that loss too so deeply. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to riff
Absolutely.
on you sharing this
No.
vulnerable thing, but I want to, yeah,
No, no, that's fine, but it's very true. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with someone who we were talking about grieving customs, mourning customs in the Victorian
mm,
era and back then. And death then and grief was something that was very public because often the calling hours were held in the parlor of your home and the house was draped in buntings and people wore armbands or women wore a certain color clothing, certain style of clothing. Some wore
mm,
veils. So it was very obvious if you saw someone that they were
yeah,
grieving. And now here we are in this era. And what has happened is back in the Victorian era, discussions of sex, gender, sexuality, intimacy, that stuff was all in the
Hmm.
closet. Well, we've cleaned that
Yeah,
closet
yeah,
out now, and that's
yeah,
all very
yeah. We got
public.
that part
We've
right, and then
we shoved grief and death back in the
yeah,
closet. So, and I thought it was a very unique perspective, but that's kind of what happened. So
yeah,
we're trying to bring it back out of the closet, if you
yeah,
will. But I was going to kind of return
yeah.
to the
Sorry.
subject at hand. So that's fine. The point we're trying to make is that you need to be careful. You need to, again, consider what it is you want out of it. If you think sound might help you and you decide to go to a sound bath because you're curious what this sound sounds like, what the instruments sound like, if you haven't heard singing bowls or crystal bowls, you may have heard gongs and chimes, you may have heard drums, but maybe not all connected, all intertwined, and you're curious, by all means, spend a little bit of money, go to a sound bath. If from that point you decide, oh my gosh, I felt something, I want to know more, start digging. Be careful and look for someone that you can say, oh, look at their background. That's impressive. They must know what they're doing. Get referrals. Ask for recommendations. Who else has worked with you? And can I talk to them? Remember, you're hiring someone to help you
Yeah,
in a matter of speaking, and that means that you should be able to choose who you want and who you feel is going to give you the best outcome. And we're talking a lot about sound, but it doesn't have to be specific to
hmm,
sound. It can be specific to finding a therapist to work
yeah,
with. You're going to pour your heart out to this person. It needs to be somebody that you can build a solid relationship with. And if you start with someone and it's not working,
yeah,
well, fess
yeah,
up. Say, this isn't helping
yeah,
me. I'm not getting the help I wanted. And if they're a good therapist, they're already going to know that and they're going to be helping you find someone
yeah.
else. So all we want to say really is that Latin phrase, caveat
Mhm.
emptor, let the buyer
Yeah.
beware. Don't hesitate to do your research because in the long run, you'll benefit from it. Today, our episode may have prompted a lot of questions with listeners. What about this? What about that? I encourage you to reach out to me. We're going to have contact information for Duff as well, and you can reach out to him as well to get some of these questions answered. It's so important because the longer we remain in, especially this little shell of grief, devastated by all these emotions we're feeling, the harder it's going to be to move forward, to start the healing process that you're going to be in for the rest of your life, probably. But after a period of time, trust me, I speak from personal experience, there is the possibility that you could be happier than you've ever been in your entire life. And I can go into that more another time, but might require another soapbox.
That's a good
At
soapbox.
any
Yeah.
rate, this is the time, Duff, where for my guests, I turn the microphone over to them and let them speak directly to our listeners without me interrupting with questions or comments. So the mic's all yours.
Thanks,
Go
Kathy.
ahead.
But your questions and comments are so great, man. I love them. One last thing I wanted to say before I'll give my info and everything, but just along the lines of what you named in terms of being informed about who you work with. I want to double down on what you said about speak to the person, ask them how they work with grief. In the therapist community, a lot of us will talk about being trauma informed and having trauma informed care. And I see that
Mm-hmm.
word starting to kind of trickle into sound work too. And that
Mm-hmm.
is really valuable because I mean, most people would frame loss as a form of trauma, you know,
Yes.
and if someone says, I don't know what you're talking about, that may mean that, because different people get different things from sound. And if you go
Mm-hmm.
to attend a sound bath, prepare ahead of time for the fact that you might have a big, visceral reaction. You might have some emotions come up. You may not everyone does, and what you'd be looking for, hopefully, is someone who can support you in that, someone who knows what to do instead of kind of, you know, just kind of not knowing what to do with it, not knowing how to respond. Or, maybe you take
Mhm.
someone with you who's a trusted person who could be there to support you. One of the hardest things about grief is that we tend to go through it alone. The isolation is such a
Yeah.
huge piece. So, when you're looking for a helper, whether it be a therapist or a sound
Mhm.
worker or whatever, someone who's going to create safety and support for you is so valuable, you know? Anyway, sorry, one more
Absolutely.
soapbox. I had to get it in. So yeah, I've got a couple of things I can share. I do my therapist work in Texas. Now I actually live in Georgia now, as a matter of fact. So
Oh.
yeah, we hadn't talked about that beforehand, but so I still maintain my license in Texas. I do see clients anywhere there. That's the way the licensure works,
Mhm.
and I'm actually getting my Georgia licensure ironed out pretty soon. So I'm actually in the Athens area. So my therapeutic practice is at growingthroughcounseling.com, and that's growingthrough counseling. That's a long URL. I'll let you put it in the show notes. How about that? Growingthroughcounseling.com. My sound work is groundingsound.com. And that's, my sound work practice. I do a couple different things. I do individual work. I help facilitate breath work, which is another powerful modality for growth and healing. I just love. I actually run a retreat a couple times a year. Haven't been doing that since COVID, but hope to start up again. And I actually started my own podcast, which we were talking about, and it really delves into this topic, how to approach sound work with a mindset that thinks critically and is you can be wise without being dismissive of the deep meaning. And that's called the Grounding Sound Podcast. I only have one episode, so but it's posted on my website at groundingsound.com. So yeah, and I'm always
Sounds
yeah,
great.
yeah.
A lot more things for me to check out. And it sounds like you definitely will be back because I want to hear more about breath
Oh
work
yeah.
and how that might help. So that sounds like it'd be a great
Wow.
episode as
Yeah.
well. I try real hard to present as many different things, modalities, treatments, options as possible because everyone is so different,
Mhm.
and what might work for one won't work for someone else. But my hope is that if they hear about something, maybe it will just pique their curiosity a bit and they'll say, maybe I can try that. One of my favorites, especially, is anything you can try when you're by
Mhm.
yourself. Because we all know that when you're grieving, you tend to spend a lot of time by yourself. So if there's something that you can do all alone, you won't have to worry about other people watching you and judging you, then that may very well work. So breath work sounds like it'll be an upcoming
Oh yeah, I'd
episode.
love to talk about that. So such a powerful thing.
Well, consider it. We just need to
All right.
schedule it. You're going to be back. So, listeners, again, I thank you so much for taking the time to listen, whether you're in the car taking your kids somewhere or whether you're sitting in your backyard on your deck. Oh, that sounds so peaceful,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Except it's pretty cold up here. I had to scrape my car windows
Well,
this
you're in
morning.
Rochester, man. In
And
terms of cold, but you're not messing
I
around.
know, I know. And to think there's still an outdoor soccer game the end of this week, it's going to be pretty frigid at night under the lights. At any rate, see, listeners, see how busy I am. But that helps me personally. Maybe it won't help you. But you can have an active, happy life. And I think just by listening, hopefully, I brought you a little comfort and given you some resources, some other things to think about. So I hope you come back again next week. The directory is there. It's all on my website, it's on all the podcast apps. And I hope you find some comfort and support for yourself too. Talk to you next week as we all continue to live and grieve.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. Do you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, or do you have a question from one of our episodes? Please email us at info@asiliveandgrieve.com and let us know. We hope you will find a moment to leave a review, send an email, and share with others. Join us next time as we continue to live and grieve together.